Hello there. Thank you for watching. This is a continuation of the reading from July 2018 Road and Track. It's a longer drive, but beautiful sunset views and me doing some Ubering too. So sit back and relax. Testing the 2018 Mercedes-AMG E63S wagon. Who needs a U-Haul when you have a 603 horsepower luxury station wagon? If moving is traumatic, then the Mercedes-AMG E63S wagon is a six-figure Xanax prescription. If moving is traumatic, then Mercedes-AMG, especially when a 900-mile, one-day relocation is involved. It helps if the person moving doesn't have much stuff. My friend Lance carries his life on his back. A 30-year-old digital nomad who makes his living as an online automotive influencer, Lance hasn't had a permanent home in years. His one big possession, a Honda CBR 600, was recently stolen in front of a friend's place in San Diego, where he was crashing. Lance took the theft as a sign to shuffle on. His plan was to cart his few possessions to his parents' place in Fresno before taking his insurance payout for the bike and venturing overseas. Fortunately, just as the need arose, I was offered this schlep-worthy E63S wagon, capacious, comfortable, stylish, and speedy as Robert Downey Jr. in the 90s. A week later, we loaded Lance's life into the Benz's chrome-trimmed cargo hold. Even with my bag and backpack, the space looked sparse. "That's it?" I asked. Lance nodded proudly, embracing the millennial cliche of despising ownership's encumbrances, preferring digital storage or fleeting subscription services instead. He could not be further from the target audience of the E63S. Its owners have among the highest income of any Benz buyer, demonstrating a desire for understatement that marketers call stealth wealth. In a metastasizing horde of crossovers and the low-test E400 are the only wagons that Mercedes still exports to America. With the demise of the Cadillac CTS V-Wagon and Audi's RS Avance not available here, the E63S remains the last hot wagon sold in the US, and it is exceptionally rare. In my 70s childhood, wagons pervaded. My three siblings and I spent 4 formative years road tripping in a 3-row Chevy Malibu, bickering and being hotboxed by secondhand menthol smoke. Having imprinted early, I owned 2 wagons, a 1972 Saab 9.6 and a 2017 Volkswagen Golf All-Track. Nearly 20 years my junior, Lance grew up being chauffeured in a Chevy Tahoe SUV. "My mom would never drive a minivan," he said as we began our blast north. "I don't know anyone who had a station wagon." The accelerating shift to crossovers has diminished wagons to a mere market blip, at less than 1% of new vehicle sales. Our schedule was improbable. From San Diego to Fresno and back in 12 hours. We timed our departure to avoid traffic. We were not successful. The Benz's navigation map looked like a bundle of nerves, twisted, red, and pathological. Fortunately, we qualified for the empty high-occupancy vehicle lane. It became a private straightaway. With the 603 horsepower twin-turbo 4-liter V8, all-wheel drive, an electronically controlled limited-slip diff, and a 9-speed auto multi-clutch transmission, the E63S is the quickest passenger vehicle Mercedes makes, quicker from 0 to 60 than even the AMG GT-R. The torquey E63 excels at gleeful blasts of acceleration. Downshift 5 cogs in a snap with quick flicks of the transmission paddle and catapult from 60 up to wherever fear kicks in. Jowls thrust back toward the AMG insignia exquisitely embossed in the headrest. We surprised unsuspecting cars with passing prowess, and suspecting cars. A Mercedes SLS AMG convertible toyed with us near Capistrano. We shamed it. The Benz's interior is a compelling combination of the symbiotic and the synthetic. Wood has been vanquished, and leather limited mainly to decorating the door panels and dash top. Layers of inky Alcantara and carbon fiber surround a broad expanse of screens. Shiny bits appear strategically and perfectly machined. The metal knobs are knurled. The metal Burmeister speaker grills are perforated in concentric circles. Even the metal air vents adjust with precise clicks. It feels technical, but never austere. As we entered the wealthy OC beach towns, an Opt-Art camouflaged SUV barreled past. Its barred blast door grille betrayed it as a Rolls-Royce Cullinan, the forthcoming $325,000 high-sided vehicle from the storied British brand. This thing, along with others in the burgeoning ultra-luxe SUV category from Aston Martin, Bentley, and Lamborghini, represents part of why fancy wagons have lost favor, as wealthy consumers abandon them for imperious trucks. But they're also the reason wagons may yet resurge. Their sales were up 18% in 2017, and Buick, Jaguar, Porsche, and Volvo all introduced new wagons this year. In a rising sea of Bentegas and Uruses, a wagon remains distinctive, and discerning people appreciate that. To demonstrate the incipience of the masses, I suggested a game of Count the Wagons. We spotted 3 Fox-bodied Mustangs, a Citroen, and a Model A hot rod before our first wagon, a Porsche Panamera Sport Turismo. But then I noticed that we were near the exit for the Porsche Experience Center LA, and that the car was wearing dealer plates, so really we counted to 0. Public reaction to the E63S wagon was mixed. At a brunch stop in Santa Clarita, a rancher in a loaded F-150 gave it the side eye, but a young guy in a tricked-out Subaru BRZ offered praise. "That's pretty dope," he said. "Never seen one before." A metallic orange Dodge Magnum Hemi pulled in, metal blaring from the stereo, chrome dubs spinning like throwing stars. A young woman strutted out, lost in her iPhone. I interrupted her reverie to ask, as a fellow wagon aficionado, what she thought of our ride. She looked from me to the car and back. Fancy. Lake Hughes Road, about an hour north of LA, is 30 miles of well-paved, rural, two-lane traversing Castaic Lake State Park. Traffic and civilization vanished, like whatever resided here before the land was flooded to create a giant reservoir. Mighty Morphin Power Rangers was shot here. Lance thrills at the thought. We followed undulating blacktop through the preserve, ascending one pincer of the claw-shaped lake, looping down deep into Red Fox Canyon and along Castaic Creek before heading up towards Lake Elizabeth. The E63 rewarded our intrepidity. It powered through long sweeping turns with an unexpected combination of precise steering and computer-modulated all-wheel grip. Excitable under load. Recareered with increasing abandon through canopied straightaways as the forest blurred into diminishing perspective. The sport exhaust crackling behind us on an overrun like a ghoulish Black Forest villain. Wending up precarious switchbacks, we toyed with the throttle to encourage tetchiness in the rear tires. On the prowl, the E63 S-Wagon is preposterously sporty, but it doesn't move like a sports car or even a GT. Its dense mass seeks dominion. It reminds me of the 3,000 horsepower, 140 mile an hour speedboat that AMG and Cigarette Racing launched in partnership this year. With twin Mercuries and extra heft in the hull, it doesn't rip through the waves, it crushes them. Similarly, the E63S can, when asked, perform a solemn waltz through hairpins, vectoring its torque from front to rear with technical proficiency, but it always feels like it would rather just erase the curves with its meaty rubber. In fact, it has so much torque everywhere, always, all 627 pound-feet are available at only 2,500 RPM, that it was entertaining enough to paddle the transmission into fourth and simply iron through turns. With its 627 pound-feet of torque and 4,697 pound curb weight, we were very glad this wagon has all-wheel drive and AMG's sophisticated traction control. The optional $1,700 20-inch forged wheels clad in ZR-rated Michelin Pilot Sport 4S tires help, as do the nearly $9,000 ceramic composite brakes, though they're a bit grabby and squeaky. Stealth wealth might require more stealth. Speaking of options, our $140,730 car had $32,785 worth, including $1,100 of extra cabin insulation, a 1250 performance exhaust seemingly at odds with the aforementioned insulation, and $6,550 in carbon fiber and black gloss trim. For the ultimate and long-haul comfort, we'd replace the cradling $2,500 performance seats of our tester with the $1,320 massaging ones. Hours behind schedule and 250 miles in, we finally hit Bakersfield and the start of the home stretch. California's Central Valley is a nitrogen-misted Eden of almond trees, Brussels sprouts, bushes, and other plants familiar for the seeds, roots, or fruits they provide as food. You can't see or smell the end of it. Opening the windows to better hear the motor's lusty howl only invited in the odor and the 90-degree heat. Sadly, our E63 didn't come with a perfume atomizer in the glove box. When we pulled into Lance's parents' driveway, surprisingly refreshed after so long in the saddle, his folks seemed used to this boomeranging dance of his, showing up to drop things off, returning or not months later to retrieve them. We'd like to sell this house, maybe, move to somewhere near where Lance is, but by the time we'd get there, he'd probably be gone, his dad teased. As we unloaded the dregs, a bag of half-used toiletries, a roll of butcher paper, his dad stared. Not exactly a wagon full. As beastly as it is, in comfort mode, the E63 S-Wagon easily reverts to that aloof, placid nature Mercedes are known for. Perfect for when all you want to do is make time. On our return to San Diego, we stuck to the interstate. Long drives are inherently exhausting, but the E63 can be the antidote. Vehicular no-doze. The wagon's pre-internal thrust, its ability to zipper into any opening, revives the driver with each menacing stab of the chromed accelerator. It's a charging bull that recharges perpetually. Except when it comes to fuel. We spent more than $200 on premium in a single day, $1 for every 4.5 miles traveled. Heading back through Santa Clarita, a tractor-trailer passed laden with decommissioned VW diesel engines, ostensibly bought back from consumers, victims of the company's emissions cheating scandal. Mercedes established the American luxury wagon market with diesels back in the 80s. Now it doesn't offer a diesel option in any of the vehicles it sells in the US. People still revere those old Benzes. The diesel wagon was, for decades, the quintessential wagon. I wonder if its forced disappearance is the wagon's death knell, or what finally allows a fresh coterie to blossom. If the posh hillside neighborhoods of LA are any indication, it's the latter. Stopping there for photos, we spotted Audi, BMW, Porsche, and Volvo wagons at traffic lights and in driveways. At our final stop before returning to San Diego, we sat on the curb outside a shuttering oceanfront chicken spot, eating macaroni and cheese. An accident closed the coastal road where we were waiting for it to clear. Lance studied the wagon, which sat alone in the parking lot, gorgeous and radiant at dusk. "I still don't think I'd get one," he taunted. I pointed out that it's fast and fancy and that, in a pinch, he could live in it. "Same with the G-Class," he said. "Anyways, I'm moving to Tokyo." In Tim O'Brien's short story, The Things They Carried, objects lugged by a platoon of American soldiers in Vietnam are used as a metaphor for their inner and outer lives. Side note, this is an amazing book and I love this author. Americans, aside from millennial nomads like Lance, are a consumptive culture defined by purchases. A glance into the window of any vehicle proves we're lifeboaters, carrying our things around with us, imagining we can prepare for any eventuality. Perhaps that's why we're moving towards sport utility vehicles, but SUVs, rooted, like O'Brien's character, in the military maneuvers of Jeeps and Hummers and G-Classes, possess a certain bunker mentality, hemming in, protecting, closing others out. Station wagons have their origin in travel, in adventure, conveyances used to move people and their things from a train station to a hotel, and it's still what makes the station wagon so great. We may be comforted by the presence of our own baggage, but the wagon's essential goal is to relieve us of it, to liberate us, and the Mercedes-AMG E63 S-Wagon does it superbly. And just a quick overview for the 2018 Mercedes-AMG E63 S-Wagon. The base is $107,945, as tested was $140,730, powered by a twin turbocharged 4-liter V8, making 603 horsepower and 627 pound-feet of torque. It has a 15.4-inch vented and cross-rode carbon ceramic rotors, 6-piston fixed calipers up front, and 14.2 vented and cross-rode ceramic rotors, 1-piston sliding calipers in the rear. Wearing Michelin Pilot Sport 4S tires, size 265/35 ZR20s and 295s 30 ZR20s. Those are huge tires. It weighs 4,697 pounds for a weight-to-power ratio of 7.8 pounds per horsepower. EPA ratings at 1622 miles per gallon with a 21.1 gallon fuel tank. Estimated range of 464 miles using premium gas. 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, 2 1/4 mile in 11.2 seconds. Top speed is governed to 180 miles an hour, and it does the skid pad at 0.96 Gs. Stops from 60 miles an hour in 118 feet and 80 miles an hour in 204 feet. Couple test notes. This automatic uses a clutch pack instead of a torque converter. A clutch pack offers direct throttle response and allows for a launch control mode that revs the engine to 3,500 RPM before the clutch pack engages. All-wheel drive provides next training traction, and the E63S bolts under acceleration. Absolutely no skill is required to run the quarter mile in 11.2 seconds at 124 miles an hour. Simply point and shoot. Never feels light, and at 4,697 pounds, it isn't. Heavy steering communicates well, but the E63 understeers resolutely on the skid pad. Switch to drift mode to disengage the front axle and it becomes rear drive. Donuts inevitably follows. Quick and Dirty. Racing doesn't get any simpler or harder than in a sprint car by Jack Brew. Yet just halfway through my 21st lap of this 5th mile dirt oval, trapped in a crooked cage phone booth of a sprint car with nothing but a narrow chicken wire mesh screen ahead of me and a nearly horizontal steering wheel shaking on bushings somewhere near my knees, it becomes perfectly obvious that I am, indeed, going to hit the wall. The only questions: how hard am I going to hit, and what's going to happen afterwards? When it comes to driving a sprint car, I have so far proven to be completely, almost hilariously incompetent. This was not supposed to be the case. In the past 20 years, I've driven dozens of race cars on scores of racetracks. Miatas at Mid-Ohio, prototypes at Sonoma, American Iron on rural ovals, Subarus on dirt. No matter how unusual the vehicle or how exotic the venue, I've always managed to find a thread connecting what I was about to drive with something I've already driven. Until now. It occurs to me I would probably do better if I had never so much as put on a helmet before. I'm adapting to my new surroundings slightly worse than the first lungfish that crawled out of the ocean and died with its tail still wet. The past 6 minutes have been nothing but a horror film, where the noise from the 700 horsepower 360 cubic inch V8s ahead cranks up the tinnitus further with each successive turn. The view through the chicken mesh has been dirt, then wall, then dirt, then wall, at incrementally increasing speed. Also, a surprising amount of soggy dirt has found its way onto my tongue and teeth. At no time in my racing career did anybody teach me how to spit mud out of a full-face helmet. The impeding crash isn't all that troubles me. The problem is that everybody at Corey Kruzman's sprint car and midget driving school are so nice. It's a family affair. Kruzman's wife and her mother handle the front end of the business. His father-in-law, Fred Smith, an easygoing man with a lifelong love of Corvettes and a storyteller's disposition, drives the push truck that bump starts the sprint cars into life before every lapping session. Even the unrelated employees behave like and are treated as family. They are very serious-looking women who strap me in the car. Hobby Conway told me that she had been in some trouble before she fell in with the Crushmans. I'm on the straight and narrow path now, she smiled. Crashing this contraption means that all of these very nice people are going to have to work long hours to put it right. This is not a big-ticket operation. The school cars arrive on open deck trailers and bear the careful mark of skilled mending rather than carefree part swapping. Hitting the wall wouldn't just be painful and unpleasant, it would be rude. I shouldn't hit the wall. But I've been sailing towards it for a couple of seconds now at maybe 50 miles an hour, and nothing I've done to address the situation up to this point has worked. I've laid off the throttle, which reduces the noise, but not the rate at which I'm sliding through the mud. I've cranked the wheel all the way to the left stop, but that does nothing. I've carefully unwound the wheel to the grip point, the way that you would if your Lamborghini were experiencing severe understeer during a track day. But there's no grip point to be found. There's just one thing left to try. Crank the wheel, stand on the organ pedal style throttle, and hope for the best. The V8 screams a valve float song as the massive staggered Hoosiers spin and assume a slightly rounder shape under centrifugal force than they normally have, courtesy of their standard 6 psi inflation. Yes, that's right, 6. The wall swells to fill my field of vision, and I'm reasonably certain that I've done nothing but increase the speed of impact. Then, if by magic, the car digs into the dirt, turns on a dime, and accelerates with superbike ferocity down the back straight. The big letters Ventura on the wall flicking past in a sequential moment as I approach turn 3 and stomp my left foot hard on the brake. A stay of execution has been granted. I can't say I've figured out the sprint thing, but I have 78 laps left in which to try. In the beginning, almost 90 years ago, they were called big cars because they were larger than the 4-cylinder midget racers with which they shared the American Automotive Association circuit. Yes, that AAA, which competed with the International Motor Contest Association and a host of other fledgling organizations to put on various levels of racing across the country in the wake of World War I. Unlike the midget class, which had adopted a standardized set of rules in June of 1933, the big cars were mostly unfettered by size or displacement regulations. Some of them were eligible for and even competed in the Indy 500. Others never left the backwoods horse tracks and fairgrounds where spectators would line up to watch contests that were always dangerous and often deadly. Predictably, many of the early big cars were based on the Model T and Model A, occasionally fortified by a Miller or Offenhauser engine. By the 50s, however, purpose-built chassis were common, powered by flathead Fords. They'd also acquire a new name, sprint cars. The arrival of small block Chevy V8s in quantity ushered in the golden age of wingless sprint car racing. Although the first wing car had already appeared at the Columbus Motor Speedway in 1958, most of the action on offer throughout the 60s featured narrow, single-seat sprint cars that lacked any aero devices whatsoever and offered just an unsupported hoop's worth of rollover protection. Drivers competed on any surface available, dirt, mud, asphalt, and died with a regularity that would have been monotonous were it not terrifying. It was an era where it was possible to make a modest living by barnstorming from town to town on the United States Auto Club, USAC, circuit, hoping that your prize money exceeded your cost of repairs. The drivers who did so were deeply suspicious of full-face helmets, multi-point harnesses, and fireproof gear. They put on their trust in luck and instincts, but they were often betrayed by both. In the decades that followed, sprint car racing split into winged racing, the pinnacle of which is the World of Outlaws series, a traditional wingless competition which continues through the oversight of USAC. Besides the wings, the basic template for both types of car is about the same. A tube-framed chassis with a wheelbase of between 80 and 90 inches. The driver sits bolt upright behind a firewall. Ahead of that is a methanol-fueled V8 with a direct drive connection to a live rear axle. There is no transmission nor clutch. You'll need 410 cubic inches of displacement and about 900 horsepower to win a major feature race. But in recent years, a 360 cubic inch formula yielding about 700 horses has become popular with weekend warriors due to its longer life and lower cost. With a ready-to-race weight of about 1,400 pounds, the modern sprint car matches an F1 racer for power to weight, but its materials and construction would be immediately familiar to any competent mechanic from the Kennedy era. Traction control, stability control, car-to-pick telemetry, 7-axis inertial measurement, power steering, 4-wheel drive, disc brakes, a windshield, an instrument panel, and transmission. The sprint car has none of these things. Computing power on board has come from the sack of meat behind the wheel. That's where Corey Kruzman comes in. He trains the meet, usually at the behest of parents who are eager for their children to become NASCAR standouts and emulate the dirt track path to glory taken by Tony Stewart and others. I get him from 10 to 17, Crushman laughs, and then the money from mom and dad cuts out. Then I get him again at 40-something, on their own dime. Short and muscular with a broad, cheerful face and a flat California accent, Crushman doesn't look much like the polished hot shooters recruiting sponsor list in post-race interviews nowadays. Yet his background in the sport is impeccable. He is a 3-time national champion in USAC sprint car racing, and he has won the ultra-competitive Chili Bowl Indoor Midget Championship twice, matching Stewart and handily beating the combined efforts of the dozen or so NASCAR and IndyCar luminaries who have tried their hand at the event. When I was racing, I would get called from people that just could not figure out how to be fast or how to set up good race cars. So I got together with Ventura Raceway and my sponsors to put a school together and teach it. We have 400 to 600 students a year, split between young racers looking to break out and older drivers checking off their bucket list. The bug bites some students harder than others, and so he offers an arrive and drive program for both midgets and sprint cars. Some of Crushman's school will be familiar to anybody who has attended. Skip Barber or other road racing educators. The early arrival, the waivers, the frank talk about damage and liability accompanied by a chance to insure against some, but not all of it. That's where the similarities end. In advanced classes, only 3 or 4 students are taught at a time, and only one car is in motion at any given moment. So chances are you'll begin your day by watching someone else. From the stands, the cars are close to deafening, but even the more experienced students don't seem to have much pace. They often bog down at the far end of the oval. It's easy to imagine doing it better yourself once it's your turn. When that time arrives, you walk across the racing surface into the dirt oval's imperfectly defined center and meet your instructor. I was booked for 100 laps split across 4 or 5 sessions. Offerings include a 25-lap session priced at $450 and a 6-session 150-lap course for $1,400. My coach for the day is Conway, a longtime member of Crushman's racing operations and a very capable driver. Conway eyes my custom Hinchman suit, carbon fiber impact helmet, and outside seam Stan 21 gloves with barely concealed disdain. You're gonna get dirty, she warns me. While Crushman drives a watering truck around the oval, Conway gives me the rundown on the extremely small number of controls involved. There's the nearly horizontal steering wheel, attached with an old-school quick-release collar that permits plenty of play. An oil pressure gauge sits next to an ignition switch just beneath the driver's line of sight. Next to the steering wheel is a tiny skeletonized lever that controls the flow of methanol to the carburetor. Finally, to my right, there's a lever to disconnect the rear axle from the engine. I start with the ignition switch off, the live rear axle disconnected, and the fuel turned on. When it's my turn, Smith lines up the 90s era Chevy push truck behind me while I switch on the fuel and connect the rear axle after a few unsuccessful shoves of the lever. At first, the rear wheels just skid along, but as we leave the infield and enter the racing line on the front straight, they start to turn, and I see the oil pressure needle twitching. After a few seconds of the engine being up to pressure, I flick the ignition switch, the engine coughs twice, then catches. It's time to drive a sprint car. The noise is overwhelming, and the steering wheel seems to be only vaguely connected to the front tires. The throttle pedal, on the other hand, has an immediate and visceral association with the engine. It consists of 2 aluminum bars with a spring attached, operating up and down, rather than toward and away from the driver. You put your toe between the bars, then press down to go fast. The top bar is there in case the throttle spring breaks. If that happens, lift your foot. The brake pedal is on the other side of the floor, and it too operates vertically. Pressing it will slow the rear axle and the left front tire, kind of. In my first laps, I buck wildly around the oval, throttling on and off in sympathy to the violent rocking motion of the car, stepping on the brake to no real effect, and almost hitting the wall at least 3 times. The acceleration is simply monstrous, but the car doesn't really turn or stop. It's a perfect inversion of a first-gen Miata. After the checkered flag, Conway breaks it down for me. You're trying to drift by hitting the gas on the way in, she says. This isn't an off-road truck. What you're doing won't work. I can see that, I reply. What am I supposed to be doing? Lift off 2/3 of the way down the straight, Conway says. Step on the brake to turn the car. When you reach the apex, you should be pointed towards the infield. Then accelerate out and unwind the wheel. The next 60 laps consist of me trying and failing to do just that. I can't make myself. Everything I've learned about racing, even in local Automobile Racing Club of America asphalt oval races, is directly contrary to what Conway's telling me. The problem isn't the car. It's my own stubborn habits and my own stupid ego. I desperately want to be better at this, but not desperately enough to approach it with what Zen masters call the beginner's mind and do just what I'm told. Prior to the last session, Crushman comes over. Don't overdrive the car, he says. Do it in segments. Step on the brake, turn in, wait. Be patient. Lack of patience will kill your line. Just be patient. My last session will be 15 laps. The first 10 are no better than the previous 85. Patience, patience, I repeat. Patience, patience. I repeat it aloud in my helmet, spitting dirt onto my chin bar. On the way out of turn 4, I'm on the throttle early, accelerating hard enough to smack the back of my head against the minimal bent aluminum seat. At the start-finish line, I take a breath, then mash the brake pedal. The car bends towards the apex as if by magic. I've gotten this far before, and I've always messed up by involuntarily counter-steering, then washing out towards the wall. This time I am patient. I wait. The car slides and slides and slides until I'm looking at the infield through the chicken wire mesh. Then I steer. Then I step on the throttle. The nose lifts and the car rockets towards the Ventura letters on the wall, like a Sidewinder missile freed from its pylon. Time to step on the brake again. And wait. Be patient. Look at the infield and just repeat the process. I got it. I'm putting it together. My lap times are maybe half of what they had been. I can see relief on Conway's face as I slide by, merrily churning fountains of mud behind me. The idiot road racer is kind of sort of doing it right. Then I see she is waving a checkered flag. I'm done. That was it. 97 garbage laps and 3 good ones. Even as I'm cut off the fuel and disconnect the axle to roll towards my infield parking space, I'm preparing my pitch. Give me 20 more laps. I think I'm getting somewhere. Here's my Amex. Do what you must, but there's no time for that because the next slot is booked by a semi-famous racing driver who is giving the sprint car thing a try. There are 2 photographers, a PR agent, and a drone camera operator crossing the infield to document the occasion. I slouch off in despair. The semi-infamous driver is posing next to the car I've just driven, delivering some polished lines to the camera about a new opportunity and never backing down and whatnot. As I'm putting my helmet away behind the grandstands, I hear the rumble of the push truck followed by the roar of the V8 coming to life. The revs rise and stay there for longer than what seems sensible. Then silence. I run back to find R&T photographer Andrew Trahan standing at the fence. What happened? I asked. They started up and went through turn 1 pretty hard. He replies in his typical iconic fashion. Then they, hit the wall. Oh, I say. You're not supposed to do that. The first drive of the 2019 Porsche 911 GT3 RS. Climb any higher up Porsche's performance ladder than the new 911 GT3 RS, and you might need an FIA license and Nomex racing suit. Built by the company's motorsport division, which churns out race cars almost as routinely as championship wins, the GT3 RS is essentially a track star you can commute in. An evolution of the previous GT3 RS, which debuted in 2015, the car's external changes are subtle, so here's a spotter's guide. New ducts in the carbon fiber hood come from the GT2 RS and channel air to the brakes, which allowed the nose to be redesigned to improve downforce. Louvers in the front fender vents sit higher. The big wing hanging off the back is now adjustable and offers 40% more downforce. Under the 911 turbo-shaped body hides a 520 horsepower, 4-liter flat 6. Introduced on the standard GT3 last year, the engine gets an additional 20 horsepower and 7 pound-feet of torque in the RS. When asked where the extra power came from, Oliver Berg, Porsche's manager of the GT product line, simply replied, "This is the power of the engine." What? Further questioning unveiled that the standard GT3's engine is actually an electronically detuned version of the GT3 RS's cooker. Mechanically, they're twins. Compared with the old GT3 RS's flat 6, this engine has wider crankshaft bearings, new heads with solid lifters instead of hydraulic lifters, and a ram air intake. On the RS, the titanium muffler is now finished with exhaust tips of the same material, saving 1.8 pounds. Porsche didn't apply much sound deadening to the new car, so running the engine from its 8250 RPM power peak to the 9000 RPM redline sounds like a 520 horsepower table saw cutting through a lumberyard's worth of 2x4s right over your shoulder. Unlike the regular GT3, the extra strength GT3 RS doesn't offer a manual transmission. That's because it's built to make every tick of the stopwatch count, and the dual clutch automatic is quicker around a racetrack. Porsche's automatic is smart enough to upshift at exactly the right time and downshift when you would, were you a better driver. Porsche let us try out the RS on the 3.2-mile Nürburgring circuit, not to be confused with the 12.9-mile Nordschleife on the other side of the Armco. Driving an unfamiliar track in a thinly disguised race car while jet lagged is usually the quickest way to find yourself in a gravel trap, but not in this case. For all the performance it offers, the RS isn't a jerk about it. In fact, it's your new best friend. At the hard right off the front straight, the front end grip slams your ribcage into the car's standard one-piece racing seat side bolster. How'd they get something with so little weight over the nose to turn it so well? Credit the front tires, as wide as the 911's rear tires were a generation ago. An electronically controlled limited slip differential and a rear steer system that helps scoot the big butt around tight corners. Dive into a turn faster than you thought possible, and the RS's front end just grabs and holds. Steering weight is on the heavy side, but the feedback and rapid response are notable. Metal-on-metal ball joints, borrowed from the 911s with numbers on their doors, replace the old RS's rubber in the front lower control arm in the rear links. Porsche has laced up the RS tightly, but not painfully so. Detailed and unedited messages come through the chassis, allowing you to make little adjustments and feel the grip breaking away. In short, the GT3 RS makes you think you're better than you are with each shrinking lap time. I am Walter. Hear me roar. In turn 13, a 130-mile-an-hour right-hander, the RS makes roughly twice the downforce of the standard GT3. Turn-in requires more muscle as the air presses the chassis into the tarmac. Aim towards the apex, stay on the throttle, and the front tires simply stick. Stomp the brakes, and the RS does what 911s have always done well, stop hard and fast. The brakes are one thing that Porsche hasn't changed, but the Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2 tires are a generation ahead of the last RS's tires, and they make the strong brakes work even better. For those who think a 3,200-pound RS is way too heavy, there's the $18,000 Wasatch package, which removes 13 more pounds by adding carbon fiber goodies, including roof, the magnesium one is standard, anti-roll bars and their supports, mirror caps and shift paddles. An additional $13,000 swaps the standard forged aluminum wheels for magnesium ones, and they drop another 25 pounds. A GT3 RS equipped with the Wasatch package and Michelin's Cup 2 R track tires trace the tattooed tarmac of the Nordschleife in 6 minutes 56.4 seconds. That's faster than even Porsche expected. So company reps tell us 0.6 seconds faster than the 918 Spider and a full 24 seconds faster than the previous GT3 RS. Side note, but literally this is one of my favorite Porsche GT3s out there. Porsche gave some credit for the blistering pace to the Chevy Corvette, but not for reasons you might think. During testing at the Nürburgring, Corvette engineers and drivers graciously granted Porsche an hour of the track session. It only took Porsche 30 minutes to set the time though, because if you're fast, you really don't need more time. Base prices start at $188,550, coming from a 4-liter flat 6, 520 horsepower, 346 pound-feet of torque, rear-wheel drive, coming from a 7-speed automatic, weighing in at 3,200 pounds, 0 to 60 in about 3 seconds, the top speed about 193 miles an hour. Two more 911 variants tip the scales towards driver engagement. The proliferation of the Porsche 911 shows no signs of slowing. In addition to the GT3 RS, we drove 2 other new variants. First, there's the GT3 Touring package. Think of it as a GT3 for those who have matured beyond the adolescent looks of a huge rear wing, which probably includes many people who can actually afford a $144,650 sports car. Behind the rear axle is the GT3's 500 horsepower 4-liter flat 6, making delicious noises as its valve train tickles the 9,000 RPM redline. Instead of a big rear wing, though, there's a subtle gurney flap and a retractable spoiler. That means there's less downforce than on the regular GT3, but you're unlikely to notice outside of a racetrack. Indeed, the street driving experience isn't really any different from a winged GT3, save for the fact that onlookers outside Porsche circles might think you're driving a regular issue 911. Critical to both buyers and the deep want this car inspires, it comes only with a manual transmission, save the manuals. So if you hear a blipped downshift as one drives by, you'll know that the person behind the wheel has their act together. Leather, not Alcantara, lines the interior for the same reason that an adult shouldn't carry a wallet made with fabric and Velcro. The Touring package is a celebration of maturity. It's about understanding how to appreciate the very best without having to flaunt it, and the satisfaction in knowing that, unlike the late great 911R, it's free. The package comes at no extra cost, well, except a bit of attention. Several rungs down the performance ladder, there's the $103,150 911 Carrera T. It has a 370 horsepower flat 6 from the standard Carrera, 50 fewer horses than the Carrera S, which costs just $3,000 more. In the interest of performance, the T sheds a few pounds and makes standard several performance goodies, including a lowered suspension and sport exhaust. Going for the T opens the door for 4-wheel steering, an option that's not available on the base Carrera. Manual equipped versions come standard with the Carrera S's limited slip differential and shorter final drive ratio. In the interest of weight savings, Porsche removes much of the sound deadening material and uses lighter rear glass. For an extra $5,200, Porsche will even ditch the rear seats and install lightweight front buckets with carbon fiber reinforced shelves. The standard seats have cloth inserts and more flexibility than the usual leather. They impart a retro feel to the cabin, as do the fabric loops that open the doors. Shorter gearing gives the T a bit more life, and any manual 911 is a tactical delight. Chassis changes are similarly subtle. A base 911 is about as direct as cars come. The T is even more direct, but it doesn't do anything a Carrera S won't do with the same options. For example, the 4-wheel steering system is as good as it is in any other 911. Rather than a new model, it's best to think of the T as an easy way for performance enthusiasts to go to a Porsche store and find a base 911 equipped with most, if not all, of the things you want. The 2018 Porsche 911 GT3 Touring starts at $144,650 using a 4-liter Boxer 6, aka flat 6, 500 horsepower, 339 pound-feet rear-wheel drive, with a 6-speed manual, coming in at 3,150 pounds, 0 to 60 in 3.8 seconds, with a top speed of 196 miles an hour. And finally, the 2018 Porsche 911 Carrera T starts at $103,150, coming from a 3-liter twin-turbo Boxer 6, 370 horsepower, 331 pound-feet of torque, rear-wheel drive from a 7-speed manual. Weighing in at 3,150 pounds, 0 to 60 still in a respectable 4.3 seconds, and a top speed at 182 miles an hour. The first drive of the 2019 BMW i8 Roadster. By the time an i8 Roadster shows up in somebody's driveway, BMW's Vision Efficient Dynamics concept will be nearly 10 years old. That wild show car, a turbo diesel plug-in hybrid, helped launch the company's efficiency-oriented i division. A closer to production version, the i8 Coupe debuted in 2011. The next year at the Beijing Auto Show, BMW unveiled the concept Spider, a topless i8 mock-up. The Spider was never supposed to spawn a production model. BMW bean counters informed the company's board early on that the Roadster had no business case. As a result, the i8's carbon fiber structure was not designed to work without a roof. The i8 Coupe finally hit the street in 2014. Sometime later, a few BMW engineers did something remarkable. Believing that an i8 Roadster should exist, they drove a blue coupe into a workshop, then plugged in an angle grinder. To make the old-school chop job possible, the team, led by BMW veteran René Rump, who helped engineer the gearbox on the McLaren F1, had to find a way to make the soft top economically viable. Crash tests confirmed that a roofless i8 was rigid enough. The people at BMW's Leipzig factory chipped in by figuring out how to integrate the Roadster into the regular i8 line without special tooling or disrupting the plant's complex logistics. Even with these hurdles overcome, there was plenty of work still to do. Within a tight timeline, just 22 months from when the project was approved for production. Sawing the roof off had unintended consequences. A wave of hot air, venting from the car's nose and radiator, rolled up the windshield and got sucked into the cockpit while driving. The solution? Redirect the air so it exits behind the front wheels. Next, engineers noticed a weird noise at speed, emanating from somewhere behind the headrest. Several 3D printed prototypes and wind tunnel tests later, they realized it was coming from the speaker grills, so they created new ones covered in a felt-like fabric. They also had to come up with a slightly different dihedral door design to work with the fabric roof, which folds like a Z to fit a relatively small face. Because the structure was rigid enough not to require a taller rollover device, the design team was given the freedom to create the shapes they wanted and got down to a drag coefficient of just 0.28. Compared with the Coupe's 0.26. The i8 Roadster debuted with the same upgrades that the Coupe got for the 2019 model year, 12 extra horsepower and up to 3 extra miles of pure electric range, thanks in part to a higher density battery pack. More important, all 2019 i8s also come with revised dampers and anti-roll bars. Apparently, customers complained about understeer. BMW invited us to try the car on the island of Mallorca in Spain. It wasn't the most suitable place for a sports car, with the island's mountain roads being occupied by thousands of cyclists, but the test was enough to show that the i8 is still the most comfortably spaceship money can buy. The car's pure electric range of 18 miles is perfectly adequate for the application. That's because, despite some of BMW ads suggesting this isn't an EV, it's a fast plug-in hybrid that will drive silently pretty much whenever you need to. The i8's power flow is complex in theory but straightforward in practice. When cruising, you're in hybrid mode. The i8 will switch to its 141 horsepower electric motor only under low load. In traffic, the car errs towards EV mode if battery charge allows, but you can choose batteries alone up to 75 miles an hour. Sport mode gives the drivetrain's full 369 combined horses, but also recharges the battery thanks to added regeneration under braking. The electric boost makes it feel faster than what the 4.4 second factory 0 to 60 mile an hour time would suggest. The 2019 i8 Coupe is 0.2 of a second quicker, BMW says, because it is 132 pounds lighter. It's a highly efficient package that works flawlessly in daily traffic. What's more, the suspension upgrades improve the balance of the chassis. Do those dihedral doors squeak ever so slightly under low transitions? Do you lose the coupe's 2 tiny rear seats? Is it digitally enhanced sound of a turbocharged 3-cylinder pumping from the speakers? Yes to all of that, but who cares? You're driving an insane concept car from 2012, one made real 6 years later by a bunch of dedicated people within a giant German company. A rare experience no matter how you slice it, and worth any trade-off. Quick overview of the BMW i8 Roadster, starting at $164,295, powered by a 1.5-liter turbocharged inline-3 hybrid. Peak output is 369 horsepower, 420 pound-feet of torque, all-wheel drive, 6-speed automatic. Weighing in at about 3,700 pounds, 0 to 60 in about 4.4 seconds, doing a top speed of 155 miles an hour. First drive of the 2019 Volkswagen Jetta. The 7th generation Jetta is like a changing room mirror for American consumers. Uncomfortable to look at, but achingly honest. We used to call the Jetta fun to drive, a product manager said at the North American launch of the 2019 Jetta. Now, we'd like to call it fun to be in. Fair enough, because the Jetta isn't especially fun to drive. The car tracks dead straight, even during the 100-mile-an-hour pass on a gnarled back road. The old ones were like that too. Jettas always felt grown up compared with other small cars, but now there's not a jink or judder from the steering wheel. Zero feedback. The front end tracks smooth as Skippy through the corner and over every bump. The whisper in church quietude of the front end redirects drivers' attention from textures in the asphalt to what most American consumers crave, namely a spacious interior packed with creature comforts. The car is bigger in every exterior dimension, creating extra head and shoulder room. Even low trims receive thoughtful touches, like a soft rubber dash embellished with faux stitching. It's an illusion that elevates the Jetta beyond its sub-$20,000 base price, which actually undercuts competitors like the Civic and Corolla. Considering the last Jetta's austerity, sprucing up the interior was a savvy call. Buyers who opt for the SEL trim, starting at $25,265 or higher, receive a new digital cluster behind the steering wheel. It's visually similar to Audi's Tron-inspired virtual cockpit display and offers drivers the usual info: radio station, speed, revs, in an elegant layout. The display floats on a river of shiny Steinway black plastic that flows to the stereo screen on the right. The stereo itself is operated by two knobs and a touchscreen, ergonomic bliss in an era of clutter. The Beats audio system, included on SEL and up, is a high point, one of the best available in this price range. When listening to high bit rate rap, hip hop, and electronica, every bass thump racks your ribcage, but rock music disappoints. Drums on Chevelle's Face to the Floor congeal into a muddy mess. The Jetta's exterior, tightly creased yet otherwise unadorned, conveys a heft and solidity absent from the original Swan, Civic, or trim Corolla. If you squint, there are shades of Audi S3 in the haunches and the taillights, but the visual height of the front and rear also give off a blocky Ford Fusion vibe. This Jetta is an odd mosaic, dull or handsome depending on the angle from which it's viewed, but always large. That size is central to VW's strategy in America, as is simplification. The Jetta is based on the same MQB architecture that serves the Golf and many other VWs, but trades the Golf's multi-link rear suspension for a torsion beam setup. It cuts cost and 44 pounds, but is loud and clunky over bumps, betraying the smooth front end. The 1.4-liter Turbo 4 carries over from 2018 and is now the only engine available until a Jetta GLI arrives. Power is down slightly, at 147 horses, but a new 8-speed auto transmission makes better use of the engine's power band. The car feels eager, yet never fast. VW calibrated the drivetrain for American buyers. This means liquid smooth shifts and minimal throttle input to sprint from stoplight to stoplight or spurt up to highway speed. It's a different approach than in Europe, where drivers prefer a more linear throttle response. VW has ensured that Americans will spend little effort to drive their Jettas, cranking the stereo as they wrestle traffic. The entire experience is calculated, fueled by pragmatism and VW's engineering prowess. The versatility of the MQB architecture means the company can reap the cost savings of part sharing while tailoring cars for specific markets. So there is no longer a global Jetta. Europe only gets the Golf. China will get its own small sedan built in country. And America gets a Jetta made specifically for us. Only it's not for us. For years, the Jetta's American audience included enthusiasts. I have white-knuckled memories, all slides and heart and throat steering corrections, of a pale blue second-gen Jetta Wolfsburg I drove to ski resorts in high school. The car was simple and joyous, sophisticated but spunky. That's not the Jetta anymore. VW thinks American buyers want value with the impression of wealth. They want a disco throne with faux leather and a banging stereo. They want big. All this may be true. We, however, will take a Golf. Road and Track's testing results: 0 to 60 in 7.9 seconds, doing the quarter mile in 16.1 seconds at 85.2 miles an hour, braking from 60 in 136 feet, and the skid pad at 0.83 Gs. The base price was $25,265, powered by a 1.4-liter turbocharged inline-4, 147 horsepower, 184 pound-feet of torque, front-wheel drive with an 8-speed auto, weighing 3,055 pounds. Vintage revival, behind the scenes with Hot Rod and Dirt Track Racing's New Guard. Before Josh Shaw became the man in vintage sprint car restoration, before he rebuilt a single Miller Indy car, heck, before he drove his terrifying Shark Bus, exactly what it sounds like, to pole position at the Lawrenceburg Speedway, he worked the t-shirt airbrushing booth at an amusement park. It was my second job after the Valvoline oil change, he laughs. My father showed me how to do pinstriping and lettering. He said that I'd never go broke if I knew how to paint a sign. It wasn't the only thing that Dan Shaw taught his son. Josh grew up in the sprint car scene around Cincinnati, Ohio, following his father to dozens of races before beginning his career in karts at the age of 10. 6 years later, he was behind the wheel of everything and anything, up to an International Motor Contest Association modified dirt track racer at the pointy end of the grid. From there, it was a short step to restoring older sprint cars and an even shorter step to building his own hot rods. I'm from the old school in that regard, Shaw says. The purpose of a hot rod is to make noise and cause a ruckus. Shaw went to school with the intention of becoming a professional illustrator. He built a reputation as an artist who could paint a car, a private plane, even a cigarette boat. But Shaw couldn't take his fascination with the racing of his father's generation, the sprint cars that exceeded 100 miles an hour on short ovals without much more than a roll hoop behind the driver's head for protection. Given his upbringing and old school inclinations, it's no wonder his shop, Shaw's Vintage Racing, in Waterford, Michigan, combines elements of museum, working garage, and manufacturing facility in equal proportion. Walls are covered with racing banners, autographed posters from the likes of Dale Earnhardt, and original metal gas station signs. Shaw is trying to make space on the ceiling to hang vintage BMX bikes that he has painstakingly restored in homage to his youthful years as a racer and trick rider. Before opening Shaw's Vintage in early 2017, he spent 7 years of his fabricator at Zicares, the Cincinnati's race restoration shop known for complete mastery of Miller Indy cars, right down to the ability to cast new engine blocks from original diagrams. After venturing out on his own, Shaw quickly built up a 2-year backlog of restoration work for sprint cars and hot rods. An ex-AJ Foyt sprint car Shaw is in the process of touching up sits next to the 1938 Eastwood Special he restored to run in the Race of Gentlemen, a classic car tribute in Wildwood, New Jersey last year. His semi-orderly workbench is crowded with tools that convey a love of old Indy cars. There's a T-handled Offenhauser spark plug wrench Shaw made during his stint at Zicares. If you look at the old photos, every chief mechanic at Indy had one of these. It takes 10 minutes to make, but once you have it, you're connected to that tradition, he says. I have quite a few of the ones used back in the day as well, with names and dates engraved. Shaw scours swap meets and estate sales for vintage photographs, particularly those taken at Indy. With an encyclopedic knowledge of IndyCar history, he can often immediately identify people and cars in the shots. Also on the bench is a forlorn lead hammer used for knockoff wheels, bearing the scars of countless rapid removals. It came with a few mid-60s United States Auto Club, or USAC, sprint clubs that collector Ken Keelholtz had Shaw source and restore a decade ago. He wanted to put a new head on the hammer, but I won't let him do it, Shaw says. This curator's reverence for racing history is a recurring theme, whether he's discussing how to properly restore old Hillebrand wheels or enthusing over his acquisition of the dyno control station used by Penske Racing in the 70s and 80s. Next to the spark plug wrench is an old stamped metal toolbox adorned with a Shaw's Vintage sticker. This has everything you need to start an Offie. Fuel pills, feeler gauges. I'll be at a show and someone will always ask for help with their Offie, so I bring the box with me, he says. The massive lathe against the brick wall is for his newest project, millimeter perfect reproductions of the 17-inch steering wheel used in old sprint cars. These have been out of production for a while, and although I used to buy them for $50 at swap meets, they were getting to the point where you'd see them for $800 on eBay. I traded some old racing parts for the mold I'm using for the steering wheel cover. Some of the original wheels were spring steel, cut from old saw blades. Mine are laser cut from 304 stainless. Then I used a vintage mold to put a plastic rim on them. Though they look just like the originals, his wheels don't flex under the strain of steering forces like the old ones. I'm selling them for $385, so it's not just rich guys buying them. As one of the younger torchbearers for these vintage dirt trackers, Shaw feels a sense of duty to spur a new generation of enthusiasts. I want to be a bridge between young USAC racers who have interest in these cars and the grumpy old man who won't talk to them, he says. I'm telling them, the guys who race these old cars were just as brave, just as badass as you want to be. Every time I bring a 60s sprint car to a USAC event, the young racers are all over it, and that's good. In addition to running the shop, Shaw continues to race in everything from the Sports Car Vintage Racing Association in a Dorn 4GT, owned by Keelholtz, to the Tulsa, Oklahoma Chili Bowl Dirt Track Championship, not to mention his Shark Bus, which plays the villain's role at the Lawrenceburg, Indiana Short Oval. Shaw also manages to do a fair amount of pinstriping and lettering in between restoration gigs. When we spoke, he just spent the weekend completing an elaborate job on an 18-wheeler. Needless to say, the price for original Joshua Shaw artwork has risen quite a bit since its amusement park airbrush days. Put your order in now. It won't get any cheaper. Shaw's Vintage might deal almost exclusively in the past, but its future looks bright indeed. One giant leap. When Audi's all-wheel drive system took flight. Rally driver Hannu Mikkola and navigator Arne Hertz couldn't have known as they crested a hill that they were about to be frozen forever in an iconic and crucial moment. This image of the Audi Quattro World Rally Championship race car would sear itself into the consciousness of an entire generation. There is debate as to who took the photo and where. Audi says Rally San Remo, 1982. Mikkola thinks it was at the 83 Rally Finland. It was a long brow type jump, a very long flight, at about 150 kilometers an hour, he says. The photo encapsulates a period of racing dominance that helped Audi establish its road-going all-wheel drive technology. But like every overnight success, the Quattro story was years in the making. Audi's all-wheel drive germinated in a 1970s West German military contract for a Jeep-like 4x4. Volkswagen Iltis beat out a Mercedes-Benz prototype that would develop into the G-Wagon. Soon, Audi sought to apply all-wheel drive to passenger vehicles. Development of the Quattro road car and the Rally Racer happened simultaneously, with a great deal of input from Mikkola. Audi tapped the Finnish driver based on his years of experience and clean driving style, both of which seemed suited to the dynamics of the nose-heavy Quattro blueprint. Audi wanted Mikkola racing the front drive 200 for the first half of 1980, until the all-wheel drive car was ready. But Mikkola, debating the car would be completed so soon, committed only to testing in 1980, continuing to drive for other manufacturers. He joined Audi full-time in 1981. It may be hard to fathom now, but all-wheel drive was at the time unproven technology. Naturally, other rally drivers were skeptical. They thought, okay, I was 37 years old and I just got my pension. Mikkola says they never believed that the car was going to be quick. It took 2 years before they realized it was the future. In the meantime, the future needed some work. Early breakdowns were inevitable as new systems were refined, but Audi was determined to make the most of its investment, and not only on the track. I have never seen a rally team so connected to production car building, he says. Ferdinand Piëch, then head of Audi's technical development, used racing as a testbed for new technology that often wasn't intended for rallying. Mikkola says Piëch told him, I can get an answer from you in 3 months. If I put it in development, it takes 1 year. Turbocharging, a relatively immature technology at the time, was also key to the Quattro. It too had teething problems, namely low RPM lag. Like nothing, and then it was like literally someone hitting you, Mikkola recalls. Wheel spin was key. It kept the turbocharger spooled and the engine in its power band. This made the Quattro race cars well suited to gravel and snow, but less competitive on asphalt, until an anti-lag system was developed in the mid-80s. Another challenge was getting the car to turn properly. Audi's front drive platform, with the engine ahead of the front axle, had to compete with better balanced, purpose-built rear drive race cars. It was a lot of work to get it handling right, he says. By 1981, the reality of Quattro's capability was setting in. David Richards, who navigated for driver Ari Vantinen in a Ford Escort RS 1800 that year, guessed Mikkola was 10 seconds faster in the first stage of the Rally Monte Carlo. I said, yes, Ari, you are right, but you forget the 1 minute, Mikkola says. I was 1 minute 10 seconds faster. So it was quite nice to see their faces when they heard it. Audi took 7 outright wins in 1982 and 4 second place finishes en route to the first manufacturer's championship for a German automaker. Mikkola won the drivers' championship the next year. By end of 82, Audi would reveal its Model 80, or called the 4000 in the US, the company's first major push for all-wheel drive in a production car. The Quattro Coupe was a relatively low-run model, with just 11,452 built over an 11-year life. Audi went on to have more racing success with WRC driver and manufacturer wins in '84. By the 90s, automakers were engaged in an all-out, all-wheel drive war, both on rally stages and in showrooms. The Quattro's success in WRC is one of the reasons all-wheel drive racing thrives today. It helped create a market for all-wheel drive road cars that turned a previously sleepy German brand into a global player. Bring in the laser. Sometimes adding lightness gets complicated. Engineers developing the BMW i8 Roadster found that a plastic bracket securing a flap in the tonneau cover was flexing during testing. A traditional metal part wouldn't work, so they resorted to selective laser melting. The process, a form of 3D printing, uses lasers to melt successive layers of powdered metal no thicker than human hair, about 50 microns. It's able to create complex shapes impossible to produce through conventional casting or machining. The resulting aluminum alloy bracket weighs less than an ounce, lighter than the plastic piece it replaced, but is significantly more rigid, thanks to its structure inspired by forces in nature. Automakers commonly use 3D printing for prototypes, but the technology remains rare on the assembly line. With the BMW i8 Roadster, the BMW Group became the first car maker to 3D print a production run of several thousand metal parts, says Jens Erdl, head of BMW Group's additive manufacturing center. BMW is able to make 240 of the parts at a time. Finally, let's ask Bob, by Bob Lutz. Dear Bob, do you see further consolidation of the world's top auto manufacturers, and who will be buying or merging with whom? Yes, there will be further consolidation on a fairly massive scale, especially in China, where the plethora of local producers will be reduced to a handful. On an international scale, more mergers, alliances, and takeovers loom, as it's getting harder for any one company to handle the thicket of regulations, highly segmented market demand, and commitment to electrification and autonomous driving. It's overwhelming. The business is changing at an accelerating pace. Nobody knows exactly which form it's finally going to take. Ergo, leverage your strengths and seek partners to cover your gaps and weaknesses. With today's cafe standards, engines downsizing has become a must. However, there is a certain joy in hearing, let alone driving, a V8 or V12 powered vehicle. So why don't manufacturers offer a 3-liter V12 or even a 2.5-liter V8? You make a very good point, and small V6 through V12 engines would be a ton of fun. But several things stand in the way. Number one being cost. Clearly, all these added machined, cast, forged, and stamped parts will drive the cost to more than double that of a modern inline 4. But there are other problems. A 2-liter V8 or V12 would have tiny cylinders. These have an emissions problem as the ratio of crevice space, the area at the edge of the piston, to cylinder volume goes up. That means a less clean burn and worse emissions. It seems that the internal combustion engine is happiest, cleanest, and most efficient with cylinder volume at about half a liter per jug. Thus, the ubiquitous 2-liter inline 16 valve 4 is becoming the standard engine globally. Are there any killed-off cars you would like reintroduced? Not many. Most deserve to die. But I wish the need to close a plant hadn't killed the Pontiac Solstice. The car looked good, had superb performance, was highly tossable, and returned great fuel economy. With normal evolutionary tweaks, it could have sold for decades. I also regret the demise of the Holden-engineered large rear-wheel drive V8 sedans, from which we harvested the much laminated Pontiac G8 and the late Chevy SS. Of all the firms you have worked with, which did you learn the most from? And at which did you have the most success? A great question, which triggered a trip down memory lane. The answer has to be BMW in the early 70s. The company was small, building only 180,000 cars and 20,000 motorbikes per year. There is not much in the way of staff. If there was something major to be done, you had to do it yourself. This was in sharp contrast to the big companies, where there are specialized staffs for everything and you must turn it over to them. BMW gave me the valuable senior level, hands-on, buck stops here training. Today, BMW is huge and as bureaucracy ridden as any other car company. And that concludes the July 2018 Road and Track. Now switching over to a different magazine, we're going to read from the July 2019 Automobile Mag. The editor's letter. Wonderful, windy, wedding beetle. The wind is starting to make my eyes water. A car whizzes by on the left to pass me, and a shower of pebbles peppers my face as it does. This is the point where I curse myself for not bringing my sunglasses. I quickly glance down at the speedo to see how fast I'm going. About 40 or so. Feels like 80. Not surprising. I suppose when the car you're driving has no windscreen, no sheet metal to speak of. No, this is not a low-slung, track-attacking tube-frame machine like an Ariel Atom. This is a 50-plus-year-old VW Beetle in all its air-cooled, rear-engine 44-horsepower glory. But as you've no doubt guessed by now, this is no ordinary bug. Right now, I'm just hoping for a bug of a different sort doesn't whack one of my eyes before my drive is over. Throughout Volkswagen's history, there have been numerous notable coach-built vehicles constructed using the Beetle as the basis, and VW helped assemble several of the most epic examples for a special class at the 2019 Amelia Island Concours d'Elegance. Featuring 12 cars, Amelia's Best in Class award for custom coachwork Volkswagens went to a 1954 Raumtisch Beeskow coupe named for a project-led Johannes Beeskow, who would later be poached by Karmann. That delightful Raumtisch car is a rolling work of art, to be sure, but arguably the most unusual and memorable coach-built Volkswagen on the Amelia field. The car that we would later drive actually started out as art. As the story goes, a talented Mexican welder and metalworker named Rafael Esparza Prieto was asked by his boss at the Volkswagen parts shop where he worked to create a Beetle shell made out of wrought iron. He wanted to use it as a sign of sorts for the shop. Prieto did, and it eventually attracted lots of attention from the public as well as certain VW execs who noticed it, as the shop was located near its Mexican factory. With the 1968 Olympic Games in Mexico City approaching, Volkswagen wanted to do something memorable to showcase its commitment to the country and commissioned Prieto to build an actual running version of the car using a Beetle chassis. 2 cars were built for the Olympics, and they were runaway hits. From there, the legend of the wedding Beetle was born, a moniker born from its resemblance to Cinderella's wedding coach. Prieto eventually built some 20 wedding Beetles in all. The history of the particular car VW brought to Amelia is a tad murky. A query to VW's German mothership collection where it's housed came back that the car in question started out as the U.S. market 1500 series Beetle built in 1968 in Germany and was shipped to the U.S. sprayed in Peru green. Sometime after that, Perito worked his wrought iron magic. It's just after dawn. Overcast skies hung over the Atlantic and blanket Amelia Island, the ocean air thick with moisture. The car is waiting for us in the hotel parking lot. As we approach it, the red seats seem to float inside its intricately designed iron shell painted white. Opening the door is like entering a gate. Once inside, I'm trying to wrap my head around the fact that I'm about to drive this thing. There are the front tires, the steering column, and the electrical system. Stuff you never see. It's all right there in your face. That and little else but the work of Perito. I start it up, and the Wedding Beetle hums its flat four song with no off-key notes, and I quickly get used to the clutch take-up as we pull out of the plantation and head toward a smooth two-lane coastal road. I ease the ironclad bug onto a stretch flanked by wetlands, woods, and the ocean. This steering wheel is cocked to the left, and it's vague with a capital V, but hey, at least you can see the tires turn. I'm deliberate in my operation, and as I get up to speed, the wind starts whipshawing me. Other than the obvious, the bug's a fully functional piece, with Michigan license plates to prove it. Everything works, the lights, turn signals, and the gauges. We stop a couple miles up the road to get some glamour shots. As the sun breaks through the morning gray and shines down it, I get a true sense of Perito's work, the hand-wrought beauty of it all. This was also the first time I'd driven a vintage Beetle. I was instantly enthralled and surprised by its sprightly nature in spite of its paltry horsepower, no doubt aided by the added lightness of this particular car's bodywork. Now I know why the bug became so intertwined with the fabric of automotive history. The simplicity of its mechanicals laid bare, driving the whimsical Wedding Beetle served as a windblown lesson about the bug's humble nature, ease of operation, and versatility. It was and still is the people's car. Want to see the Wedding Beetle in action? Head to Automobile Mag's website and search Wedding Beetle. 50 years ago, he won the Indy 500. But there's a lot more to him than that. This is all about Mario Andretti. You might not know loads of detail about the life and career of Mario Gabriele Andretti, but you almost certainly know of him. Across generations, you're not alone. He was an American household name long before cable TV proliferated. He retired from his open-wheel career following the 1994 season, when the internet was but a non-mainstream novelty. And while the World Wide Web was an everyday commonality by the time of his final professional race, at Le Mans in 2000, the round-the-clock, globally interconnected tentacles of smart devices and social media remained several years over the horizon. Yet walk through, say, a grocery store today and ask 10 people if they've heard of Andretti, and you'll probably receive as many nods in the affirmative as you will curious looks of non-recognition. Some things you may not know about him. He's remarkably gracious, but also mischievous. Still the kid who loves go-fast toys, like jet skis and motorcycles, along with a good laugh. We're aware when we arrive in his Pennsylvania home that media members don't have the best reputation there lately. Back around Thanksgiving, the film crew visited and left cases of equipment lying around. Andretti's assistant of more than 30 years, Amy, tumbled over one of them, breaking her knee. I usually bring my boys home from Chicago for that, Andretti says with a smile, acknowledging the cliche about broken kneecaps received at an Italian's house. But the incident bothers him. Poor thing, she suffered, he says, shaking his head in disbelief. What else? His home is filled with hundreds of trophies and framed photos and memorabilia from his career, yet it doesn't feel at all like an egomaniac shrine to himself because it's clear the most important items to him are the ones involving his family. He doesn't collect cars, though he owns a new Lamborghini Aventador S and a Corvette ZR1. The only race car he owns, the Newman Haas Lola Ford Cosworth he ran in his final IndyCar race in '94, sits uncovered in his garage. He'll only get in a race car or on a snowmobile or anything really from the left side because a long time ago, many cars he drove had exhaust on the right side. He won't sign autographs in green ink because it always seemed to lead to a poor race result. He owns a pug named Gabe. In addition to giving rides in IndyCar's two-seat race car, he still performs straight-line testing for son Michael's IndyCar team. Oh, and no surprise, he doesn't much like the idea of autonomous cars. A few years ago, he attended an anniversary event for another car enthusiast publication. A certain boisterous, long-term automotive exec was there, and all he talked about in his spiel was the coming of autonomous cars, Andretti says. I'm looking around at everybody, and he's halfway through. I get up, I said, who the hell invited this dude? I got a standing O. He never spoke to me the rest of the evening. I said it was a joke, but I thought, what a subject to bring in, the freaking autonomous cars. Query the 79-year-old himself on what people don't know about him, and he takes a long pause as he tries to separate Mario Andretti, one of the most successful and famous racers in history, from Mario Andretti, human being. That's a good point, he says, then adds, it's more like, what is it you don't want to know? Or, I don't want you to know. Yeah. Probably the fact that all I wanted to do is just enjoy my life without pretense, seeming like you're always under scrutiny in some ways. Around here at home, I can go to the grocery store and I feel like it. I do that somewhere else and they recognize you, and like people think I should be seen at Saks Fifth Avenue, not at Walmart, that type of thing. There's a lot of those things that you would say, damn it, I just want to be a regular guy. Sometimes you almost think, do I have to uphold a certain image that I don't really care about? This is one of the reasons why I love this area, he says of Nazareth, his hometown ever since the Andretti family emigrated here from an Italian refugee camp in 1955 when he was 15. I don't have to put up any front. I can be billowing off the driveway if I want to. Some might say, don't you have people that come in for that sort of thing? But sometimes they didn't do a good job and I just do the rest. I own my own crap. Almost 25 years removed from his final IndyCar race at Laguna Seca, Andretti's answer is a common one between sports megastars and other celebrities. It's often a price inevitably paid for the spotlight that shines on them, a result of the drive, talent, and competitive determination that pushed them to the fore of a culture's collective consciousness in the first place. Andretti has been the subject of countless references, music to movies to cops asking nabbed speed demons, "Who do you think you are, Mario Andretti?" He can't pinpoint an exact moment when he realized that he had reached that place, but he recalls instances that were in retrospect first sign indicators. Back in the 70s, on my way to Riverside International Raceway on the 405 in LA, it was pretty late at night, he says of one such moment. I had a Formula 5000 test. I hear that Charlie Daniels song on the radio, Uneasy Rider. This lyric about Mario Andretti, he would have been proud. I'm thinking, holy crap, that one kind of took me aback quite a bit at the very first time. And there were a few more, of course, that I thought were kind of nice. I look at it as all very humbling, because that means somehow your work is being noticed, and there's no bigger compliment than that. There was no bigger stage for Andretti's ascension than Indianapolis Motor Speedway, but a palpable fixation to the stage on his results at the Brickyard, especially as the year marks the 50th anniversary of his lone win there, does his career record a disservice. His abbreviated resume: 12 Formula One wins, 18 poles, and the 1978 World Championship, 52 IndyCar wins, second all-time, 67 poles, first all-time, 4 titles, 3 Indy 500 poles, and 1 Indy 500 win. USAC National Dirt Track Champion, IROC Champion, Daytona 500 winner, 3-time 12 Hour of Sebring winner, named Driver of the Century by the Associated Press in 1999, only driver to win the F1 title, the Indy 500, and the Daytona 500, Pikes Peak winner, 24 Hours of Le Mans Class winner, winner of the Daytona 6 Hour. Raises point and Andretti raises his eyebrows. It's definitely just the significance of Indy. It's what everyone else puts on it. He allows, and for a second you sense he feels freed by the opportunity to address the topic from a different context than usual. I have a lot tougher driving to win Milwaukee, for example, than winning Indy. Indy, the place is fickle in every way. Conditions can change dramatically, and it can really get you down. But it's not this end all. I'm pretty proud of my career. People want to say, hey Mario, I was there at Indy in '69, as if I only won one race in my whole life. And sometimes I figured, Jesus, nothing about the rest of it. Sometimes it frosts you a little bit, but that's the reality. He chuckles as he says all of this, his tone bemused, never bitter. The tongue-in-cheek semi-exasperation is no doubt amplified by the fact that his 1969 season itself was remarkable. A Tasmanian devil-like tornado of traveling, racing on 3 continents, testing, and personal milestones. It began on February 1st, driving a Holman Moody Ford in a NASCAR race at Riverside, and concluded on December 31st with an SCCA F5000 outing at Sebring. Including this Indy win in the number 2 Bronner Hawk Ford, he competed in 37 races across 7 different categories, driving 10 different cars, collecting 5 poles, 9 wins, and his 3rd USAC Champ Car title. On a Sunday that July, Nazareth held a parade and reception honoring his Indy win, and later that evening, on the way to the local track for a dirt race, his late wife, Deanne's water broke 2 weeks early in all the excitement. He lost her last July after almost 57 years of marriage. Andretti won the 100-miler, then rocketed to the hospital in time for the birth of his 3rd child and only daughter, Barbie. Just about the only negative he recalls from the time was the theft, one that would distress any race driver today, let alone in the era before personal electronic devices and digital storage. I kept notes from day one, he says, and can you believe it? In 1969, I had my notebook, which is 3 inches, 4 inches thick by then. I had it in my closet in Indianapolis. It was stolen. I'm not going to mention the name, but I think I know who stole it. It was like taking half a life away from me. It was like my arm was taken away. Quite how much that violation affected Andretti's results during the ensuing years, he can't say. People might forget now, but his Indy win came in his only 5th start there. Surely more successes would ensue on the famous 2.5-mile super speedway. Still, he felt a weight leave his shoulders that afternoon. Even though mine was a relatively short career before I won that, and I had won other races and good races, including the Daytona 500, I thought, man, I've got to win this one. And then when I crossed the line, I go, thank God for giving this. And it's just such an incredible relief. You just got to get at least one ring, you know? And then you're part of an elite club there. And here we are. Who knew 50 years later we would still be talking about this race? Ironically, perhaps, this anniversary feels so special because Andretti never again won. Ironically, perhaps this anniversary feels so special because Andretti never won again the greatest spectacle in racing in another 25 attempts. In his entire career, he completed all 500 miles 5 times total, suffering DNF after DNF in a litany of improbable circumstances. He won the 1981 race by finishing second on the track to Bobby Unser, who the next day had his victory stripped due to his passing of cars under caution. 4 months later, sanctioning body USAC reinstated Unser's win in what remains a decisively controversial example of racing politics. Andretti never returned the winner's ring and wears it to this day. The fact no other member of the Andretti family, including sons Michael and Jeff, who suffered career-altering injuries in the 92 500, grandson Marco, and nephew John, has won the race, combined with Mario's tribulations, added more fuel to the fire known here for decades as the Andretti curse. However, there's another less entertaining way to look at the facts. Mario did win the race, as well as 3 poles. He, Michael, Jeff, and Marco all won Indy's Rookie of the Year award. Mario is 3rd in all-time laps led, Michael 11th. Marco finished 2nd to Sam Hornish Jr. in 2006 in the 3rd closest Indy finish ever, a 0.0635 of a second.
Let's go!
Michael has won it 5 times as a team owner. There are a lot of race car drivers who have faced the 500 in 102 installments to date and have come away with nothing, and plenty who lost their lives. Just maybe, the Andretti curse is nonsense? Absolutely, he says. I know it's kind of a joke with longtime late Indy public address announcer Tom Carnegie. He's the one who started this. I always said, far from it. Okay, I only have 1 win, but you know what? I've led more laps than all about one of the 4-time winners. The bottom line is 91-92. 4 members of the same family in the race for the first time ever. Mike, Jeff, John, and myself. Michael, the way he dominated laps led over the years. So, a curse? Far from it. And then in 2003, I get upside down while testing there, and I landed unhurt on 4 wheels. Is that a curse? Nah, that's a blessing. So this is something I never agreed with. I never ever thought of it even being close to any of those terms. The stuff on the PA, I'm driving, Carnegie is saying, Mario's slowing down, all that stuff, all that's crap. But you know, they can have fun with it. The reality is just entirely the opposite of the way it's depicted. All those years and the amount of miles there, and coming away from the 60s and 70s when it wasn't as safe as it is today, when I say I'm counting my blessings, I'm doing exactly that. Andretti never raises his voice as he speaks on the topic, never gets upset. He's seen and lived through enough of that, despite his notoriety, wealth, and competitive fire. I've never felt entitled to any of it. He stops to think about it one last time. Indy is giving us more than we even deserve. As far as the satisfaction, ultimately, he concludes, drivers, fans that look at statistics and say, oh well, let's face it, we've had our days, and yeah, we would have liked to have 4 or 5 wins like the Unsers, but I'm proud of what we did, and we're happy. We're happy we were able to achieve it at Indianapolis, and the fact that we're still here. Regardless of wins, losses, records, and those statistics, one other thing is certain. He's still the most recognizable face in the joint. Design review of the 2020 Pininfarina Battista. Yet another nice looking electric supercar, by Robert Cumberford. Talking about March's Geneva Auto Show, I noted PAL Expo's halls were full of various electrics that either resembled Italian supercars or were Italian supercars, but with electric propulsion, as I reported in this column last month. This car is neither the best nor the worst of that panoply, but it does possess the distinction of coming from the most prestigious and respected of the few remaining carrozzari, even though it belongs to Mahindra & Mahindra of India now. The Battista is beautifully made, as are all hand-built Pininfarina cars, known for almost 9 decades for tasteful classicism tempered by elegant innovation, even on pure racers. Named in honor of the firm's revered founder, this one is unfortunately more a generic Italian supercar than an example of the Pininfarina's traditional design mastery. Its shape does not express electric propulsion in any perceptible way, not with ample inlet area adequate for a powerful V12, required, be it noted, for the 5 radiators dealing with heat from brakes and 1,000 plus horsepower electric motors. Battista is basically a symbol, not a car. Supercars like this, perfect exemplars of Thorstein Veblen's 1899 concept of conspicuous consumption, are best enjoyed as objects of desire, not in actual use. dangerously low in today's SUV-dominated traffic. They're difficult to enter or exit gracefully, despite part of the roof opening. There's little luggage space, the tremendous performance cannot be realized responsibly on public roads, and parking is always a huge risk, but they look as good and sound great. Except for electric supercars, which are pretty much silent. That trait is a virtue for luxury limousines, not so much so for GTs. Irrelevancies aside, let's consider the visual details of the Battista built on the Croatian Rimac chassis. The sharp peak from the front fenders, beginning inboard of the small headlamps and curving around to join the windowsills in plain view, is a strong positive. A hard profile line starts just behind the front wheelhouses and rises to a peak all the way to the rear of the body, well inboard after circumscribing gaping inlet wells alongside the upper teardrop form. To control the profile, a line is imposed into the outboard rear fender surface to create a perceived undulating line front to rear, emphasizing an impression of power. A slot running under the wing-shaped nose cap continues up into the headlamp apertures and outlines the main full-width frontal air inlet, while a concave section of skin above the opening is separated into several inlets. The multi-layered rear fascia includes a two-part automatic air brake joined centrally. Taillights are simple horizontals, a purity that would be greatly welcomed throughout the composition. If Battista lacks the hallmark cohesiveness of past Pininfarina work, it may well be because there were such strong constraints. Remember that Automobilia Pininfarina, the manufacturer, engaged the entirely separate Pininfarina design service to shape this car and imposed many severe requirements, the most stringent of which was that the car not be at all like a Ferrari. That's tough, especially for Pininfarina. Describing some key design elements from the front three-quarter view, starting at the rear. There's a great deal of sculpting going on in this area with the transition from a convex section behind the wheel to a concavity in the rear of the door inboard of a sharp line. Where that sharp line turns inward towards the rear, a soft radius arises and leads to another sharp line that appears without a particular source. It defines the fender profile over the rear wheel, then disappears into the aft surface before reaching the taillight. The body side surface is a big concave section swelling outward to the sill below, aft to the wheelhouse, and upward to the hard line that fences a major air scoop, with a diagonal cut in the surface, defining a brake cooling scoop at the bottom. Complex but graceful shaping. Starting at the plan view bend in the nose, this surface carries a concavity back to the wheel opening. A great deal of play between convex and concave sections characterizes the Battista. The emphasis on the giant mouth gives an overall impression of a shark-like front. The second of three air outlets across the front is followed by a black panel that tends to shorten the nose visually. Now talking about the profile view, or the side view. This U-shaped slot across the front provides visual interest and ingests more air. For that air to take heat away from the mechanicals, no fewer than 3 transverse outlets spill the ingested air out of the top of the front body. Okay, it doesn't look like a Ferrari, but it doesn't look very good either. This reminds me of some SUV C-pillar treatments. This elegant, long curve is deceptive. It expands outward in plan view and then defines itself as a wing and sweeps inward almost as the body's centerline. To get a wheel-embracing fender shape, this arc is pressed into the skin, diffusing toward the outer ends of the taillights and picking up the profile of the transverse shelf under the wing and air brake panels. Subtle, elegant, and presumably aerodynamically efficient. Quite a lot is going on here. The painted accent line rises and moves on inward. The base plane is fixed, and as the body side swells outward to cover the rear wheel, it creates a triangular inlet for more air. Nice work, indeed. Derived from the transverse portion of the slot, these crisp lines help establish a fairly complex side treatment, from surface modulation in front to a freestanding transverse wing and back. The lower lip of the front end is rather like a base plate of GT race cars and gives the profile a definite shark-like look. The rear three-quarter view, starting at the rear end, boomerang-shaped in plan, taillights are refreshingly simple, straight lines in direct rear view. This flat shelf across the width of the rear is unusual, but quite agreeable. The air brake flaps curve nicely to their outboard edges. These air inlet wells may well be black holes, but they are carefully shaped to have a harmonious profile. The base plate remains straight and flat, but the body side turns inward to allow air to flow into the rear brakes. Notice the painted portion of the body skin on both sides of the wheel opening stays above and visually separated from the base plates. You see the same sharp break between body sides and the rear fascia on many vehicles, even on SUVs, always for the same reason: It reduces aerodynamic drag. Finally, the front view. If you have to hang big mirrors up and outboard because legislators won't let you use cameras, it becomes a design obligation to create nice sculptural forms for them. Tiny transverse ribs are just perceptible in the perimeter slot ahead of the fixed wing shape. This crisp surface break is a key part of the design, with consequences all the way to the rear wing. This rib is modeled beautifully, seen from any angle. Whatever its true function, this little scoop under each front corner looks very serious. Parallel diagonal struts in each side of the inlet define specific air channels. This wing looks as though it could be movable, but it's just probably fixed in place. Sharp surface brake lines provide a source of the brake in the planned view front end shape, and the slight bends in the bright trim piece separates the front wing shape from the panel behind it. Carlo Bonzanigo interview. Carlo Bonzanigo, Pininfarina's design vice president, says the hardest part of the work for his team did for Automobili Pininfarina, the eponymous but structurally separate Munich-based manufacturing company that commissioned the Battista's body design, was not letting it look like a Ferrari in any way. For the 89-year-old Torino, Italy design house that has created the bodywork for most Ferrari road cars for the past 67 years, that had to be nearly impossible. But it seems to have accomplished the task. The client firm set out its 4 requirements in a 4-part brief, with emphasis on luxury, a desire for cutting-edge effect, use of an unmodified existing chassis and battery pack, and a desire to establish the intrinsic value of its new brand. Bonzanigo is an old hand, having been at Pininfarina early in his career before moving to France with PSA from 2004 to 2017. He thinks clearly, expresses himself in a thoughtful manner in impeccable English, and with degrees in design from Art Center and aeronautical engineering from ETHEZ, a premier Swiss technical university. He is well equipped for his present role. When I commented on what seemed to be excessive cooling capacity for an electric car, he was quick to confirm that the brakes of the Battista produce twice as much heat as most supercar engines, and there are 4 electric motors in this machine along with 5 radiators, so its configuration is, as always with Pininfarina projects, grounded in reality. The Rimac chassis, for example, is totally unchanged in this application, but the cockpit was moved a bit forward to achieve the desired effect. Bonzanigo said a good amount of design effort was put into the deceptively simple interior to stress the aspect of luxuriousness as opposed to a sport or performance feeling. Controls are concentrated around the driver, who controls elements mounted on the steering wheel and a row of switches below the right-hand data screen. There will only be a limited number of these cars, all of them built in Pininfarina's compound in Cambiano, close to its design offices. Interior view. Twin screens are not the usual big rectangles, but have nicely curved lower perimeters below sheer horizontal top. Not exactly a Formula 1 rectangle or aircraft yoke. The wheel is flattened top and bottom. And why not? Looks good, works fine. It's not a new idea. Lamborghini did it decades ago. But contrasting upholstery is still smart and agreeable. Leather on both seats carries the same embossed triangles pattern, unifying the look. The rear view. This fender peak visually carries back the side profile line that is twisted inward just ahead. The sharp transition between horizontal and vertical planes creates this hard line that interrupts fender peak lines that are visually but not physically corrected to the profile's elements. The profile line resumes as a vertical hard separation between body side and rear surfaces. A larger recapitulation of the front lower scoops exhausts hot air on either side of the central diffuser. A tricky detail here, where a line that begins as a surface change behind the front wheels morphs into a vertical wall and twists inward to become a horizontal wing with incorporated braking flaps. The gentle bends in the transverse plan view perimeter are similar to, but less pronounced than, the front end. The red line across the rear opening carries through the rising color accent line on the body sides. Driving the World Champion. Driving the World Champion by Arthur St. Antone. A friend was over one evening for cocktails, and as usual, eventually the conversation rolled on around to cars. He mentioned that in a few months he planned to make his first ever pilgrimage to the annual Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance, and knowing that I'd attend the August Oscars of Classic Wheels many times, he asked me to reminisce a little. Between sips of martini, I rumbled through a few of the countless memories. Ralph Lauren's stunning 1938 Bugatti 57 SC Atlantic Coupe on the Pebble Beach lawn being carefully inspected for errant atoms of lint by a crew of similarly beautiful Lauren-attired models. Jackie Stewart blitzing around Laguna Seca in one of his original 1970s era Tyrrell Formula One cars during the Monterey Historic races. My daughter, Then just 5 years old, getting to climb behind the wheel of the real 1951 fabulous Hudson Hornet rare coupe shortly after falling in love with the Paul Newman voiced Doc Hudson cartoon version in 2006's Cars. A smile crossed my pal's face as he began imagining all the wonders that awaited him soon on California's Monterey Peninsula. Then he leaned forward. On one trip to Pebble, didn't you end up having to drive a world driving champion somewhere? Now it's my turn to smile. Haha, yes, I thought to myself, that trip. I'd brought my girlfriend, and on Saturday night of that memorable 1998 weekend, we were invited to a grand dinner hosted by Ford. As guests began to arrive and gather around the bar, I scanned the place cards on the tables looking for mine. Not wishing to waste time, I started at the table way off in Siberia and sure enough, quickly found our names. Ah well, at least we'd see the food coming from the kitchen before anyone else. Then the PR guy working the room met my girlfriend. Suddenly, as if blasted by a leaf blower, the place cards began to fly around the tables. By the time dinner was served, our names had landed on table number 1, also occupied by then Ford CEO Jacques Nasser and racing legends Sterling Moss, Parnelli Jones, and Phil Hill. The conversation was so boisterous, the dinnerware trembled. The racing stories so vivid and colorful, I felt naked not wearing fireproof underwear. The dinner, I still have the menu too, featured Dungeness crab cakes, Merlot glazed hanger steak, and 1995 Stag's Cabernet. I tried to order dessert 4 times to keep the evening going. It was like a real-life version of if you could have dinner with anyone you wanted, and I, of course, had absolutely nothing to do with it. After coffee, we were presented with a series of books focusing on the drivers in attendance. Each tome was passed around the table to be signed by its appropriate racing luminary. My books received the expected dry inscriptions, to Arthur St. Antoine, Phil Hill. Inside one, on the cover page of another, simply Sterling Moss. My girlfriend had been sitting next to Jones, the winner of the 1963 Indy 500, all night. When he handed her a copy of Indianapolis Racing Memories, 1961 and 1969, her book was signed "With Love, Parnelli Jones." She had to fly home the next day, but not before we walked among the priceless wheels of the storied Concours lawn that morning. Then, and here my memory fails me, either that night or night after, I found myself among a small group heading to the airport to catch a flight back to LA. We were to drive ourselves and leave the car, a Jeep Grand Cherokee I think, at the rental agency. Somebody tossed me the keys, and then I saw Phil Hill, 3-time winner of Le Mans, 3-time winner of the 12 Hours of Sebring, Formula One world champion in 1961 for Ferrari, the very first American ever to win the World Driving Championship. Hill climbed in the middle of the backseat and belted in. For a moment, I forgot how to drive a car. "The key, you idiot, turn the key." I'm pretty sure I didn't say it out loud. I started the engine, shifted into drive, then eased my right foot down onto the gas as if it were a sleeping alligator. I moved off, terrorized by the thought of the gyroscopically attuned backside of one of America's greatest ever racing drivers feeling so much as a crumb of forward launch attributable to me. As I melted into traffic, the other passengers, as I recalled they were fellow journalists, were giddily recalling the events of the past weekend. I took a glance in the rearview mirror. Hill wasn't talking. He was calm, his face expressionless, but I knew the man was watching me. Hill had a fearsome reputation for detail and a mind spring loaded to detect and understand the tiniest nuances in every kind of machinery, from F1 cars to vintage musical instruments. I grasped the steering wheel as if examining an orchid, using only enough pressure so my fingers didn't shake. When I changed lanes, I smoothed the Grand Cherokee sideways like a log cabin flowing across a pancake. I could feel the master's eyes behind me recording my every move. It was like trying to draw a bull with Pablo Picasso breathing down your neck. Finally, after a half hour or so sweating on the witness stand, I pulled into the airport. As I climbed from the driver's seat, I was well aware that a damning verdict might well be on its way. We all gathered at the rear gate to collect our bags. Then Hill turned to me. I just stood there, waiting. Suddenly, Hill nodded. "Have a good flight," he said with a smile, shaking my hand. And with that, he headed off on his own to check in. I had not impressed the former driving champion of the world. It was impossible, but it did appear that I had at least inspired any undue grinding of his teeth. I had just won my own sort of Grand Prix. I headed to the airport lounge to collect my trophy. An unexpected postscript to the Pebble dinner. Almost exactly a year later, my girlfriend having become my wife, my bride and I were on our way to Tanzania for our honeymoon. We had a one-night stopover in London and found a cozy Lebanese restaurant in Mayfair for dinner. We'd barely tucked into our falafel and tabbouleh when my wife looked up, her eyes wide. "Hey, there's Sterling Moss." I lifted my head, and sure enough, the near mythical driver who'd won almost half the races he ever competed in was coming through the door. "We should go say hello," my wife said, utterly unburdened by meekness. "Oh, honey," I rolled my eyes. "That's Sterling Moss. Do you have any idea how many fans he meets on a given day? Besides, we only met him a few hours over dinner, and that was a whole year ago," and my wife's smile cut me off. I looked over, and across the room was Sterling Moss. He was looking at my wife, and he wasn't just beaming. He was standing on his toes, waving. "Hi!" Nothing Mid-Century About Modern Era BMWs by Jamie Kitman. With their just so sense of modernist style, particularly in the arenas of architecture, loud sport jackets, and cocktail sophistication, the denizens of Palm Springs, California didn't get enough credit. They canonized an enduring and uniquely American hipster aesthetic look back in the 1950s that's percolated through the decades. If anything, its appeal is even stronger today, as a visit to the city's Modernism Week following a full-brand BMW ride and drive event in nearby Thermal confirmed. Legions of youthful lounge lizards came to inspect the crazy homes and gardens, dressed like their old-time forebears but presumably with even greater senses of irony. They rolled and strolled through Palm Springs streets alongside bespangled altar knockers in outfits so kitsch that one expected to find Joey Bishop around every corner. Old cars abounded. Over at the BMW Performance Center driving school on the grounds of the Thermal Club track complex a day earlier, things were less cool and a lot colder and grayer. Temperatures fell into the 40s and the sky opened flood thoroughfares never designed for biblical rainfall while closing roads, muddying shoes, and ruining moods. BMW had scheduled track days and plotted a series of off and on-road driving routes to allow journalists by the hundred to spend quality time with vast swaths of its model line, including the new 3 and 8 Series and X7, plus the latest models from BMW-owned Marquis, Rolls-Royce, and Mini. This WeHacks did, only now in a new underwater setting. As a counterpoint to BMW's increasingly bloat, I'd driven out from LA in a red Porsche 911 Carrera T with a 7-speed manual. The lightest of today's 911 variants, and refreshingly devoid of options, this car is stiffer, noisier, and altogether more raw than most of its siblings. Its clutch is heavy, frills are few, and acceleration is brutal when prodded. With a sticker of a hair more than $110,000, the T didn't even seem expensive. Not so the Rolls-Royce Cullinan, which can easily soak up to $400,000 or more of your capital gains. My first drive in one was largely on the straight, desert farm roads for which it is best suited. Although, for a tall and heavy SUV, it isn't unwieldy, as you might fear. You would never mistake the Cullinan for beautiful, but is perfectly pleasant to occupy, and it certainly has presence. Nowadays, that usually seems to be more than sufficient. The Cullinan has only 2 rows of seats, which surely holds out the promise of an even more expensive 3-row Rolls SUV. Just as the X7 must serve up an extra row over BMW's X5. For as every good German knows, no market segment can go untended long. A 3-row Mini can't be far behind, and you wonder when the 4-row crossover becomes every upscale mom and dad's go-to. Setting off for a 1-hour driving loop in BMW's i8, intriguing and very good. I got lost on the premises of the 344-acre Thermal Club, consisting of 4 racetracks and a country club. Floundering to find outbound roads, I noticed several expensive villas being built on the property, several of them backing up directly against the track. The facility is ringed by tall sound barriers to keep the noise contained, and several of the finished villas feature improbably tall garage doors to permit in-home parking of car haulers and tour buses. Surrounded by farms and distinctly unwealthy people, the level of surrealism is high. The next day in Palm Springs, the sun came out and I was delighted to stumble upon a star embedded in the sidewalk celebrating automobile contributor Bob Merlis, a music business publicist of some distinction and part-time Palm Springs resident. I gave Bob a call and arranged an in-person introduction to his new Simca 1000 Bertone coupe and pillarless 1973 sedan DeVille with the Mahara cloth interior and less than 15,000 original miles. A gift from a relative. Also at his fab modernist home, we came across a bevy of Studebakers, including his cherished Avanti. To give a sense of where this town is collectively, 2 other people on Bob Street also own a sporty Studebaker, a lowly designed coupe being an enduring talisman of Palm Springs style. Modernism is the new classicism. Meanwhile, I also learned that despite a growth spurt, 911s are still the bomb, and BMWs are quickly growing larger while their grills grow even faster. As the old folk in Palm Springs might say, they ought to get a doctor to take a look at that.
29 and I find myself wondering what did happen to the last 10. I ran away with my life, fast forward, never turn back again. It's kind of funny that the more we pass time, the more we need to set them rewind. And 19 was the year I had to leave you, but now I'm seeing all the signs. Is this really happening? I can't believe it's true. I'm just as surprised as you. Is this really happening? I can't be too sure, but one day I'll be yours again. Life lessons come one in a dozen. The other 11 give something from nothing. I sit here looking for an answer. Maybe the biggest question was in the last chapter. You gave me the soul I have today. Without you I never could have moved away. But now I see what you teach. I do believe I always should have stayed. Yeah. Is this really happening? I can't believe it's true. I'm just as surprised as you. Is this really happening? I can't be too sure, but one day I'll be yours again. One day I'll be yours. One day I'll be yours. One day I'll be yours. Life lessons come one in a dozen. The other 11 give something from nothing. Life lessons come one in a dozen. The other 11 give something from nothing. Life lessons come one in a dozen. The other 11 give something from nothing. Life changes just open the door. One thing's certain, I'll always be yours.